The sun was low over the fields, spreading a warm orange glow across the quiet farmland. The place looked ordinary, almost forgotten by the world. Two men worked side by side, their hands steady as they guided old tools through the soil. They dressed simply, shirts faded from many washes, jeans rough at the knees. To anyone passing by, they were just two farmers trying to live a quiet life. But behind their calm eyes and silent movements were lives no one here could imagine. Keanu Reeves, soft-spoken and gentle, carried the kind of sorrow only a man who had seen too much could carry. His kindness was quiet, like the way he stopped to save a bird tangled in a wire or offered water to a traveler on the dusty road. Beside him worked Steven Seagal, broader, slower in his steps, his face unreadable. He spoke less than Keanu, but when he did, his words carried weight. The village nearby had learned to respect them. The two men never raised their voices, never looked for trouble. They bought supplies with calm nods, helped neighbors repair roofs after storms, and gave more vegetables away than they sold. Many thought they were brothers, though their features were different. They never confirmed it, and no one asked. But peace does not always last, especially when greed finds a way to cross into quiet places. One night, as the moon rose over the barns, the village tavern grew noisy. A gang of men had arrived, riding in loud trucks with engines that seemed to roar like beasts. They laughed too hard, drank too fast, and spoke with arrogance. Their leader, a man with sharp eyes and a scar that ran down his cheek, slammed his glass onto the wooden table and declared that this land was wasted. "Farmers," he spat, his voice thick with alcohol. "Soft men, easy to scare. We'll take what we want from them. Their crops, their land. No one out here will stop us." His gang cheered, slamming fists on the table. Some villagers lowered their eyes, knowing what these men were capable of. Fear spread quietly, like smoke creeping under a door. The gang did not know about the two men in the fields. They did not know that Keanu had once walked through cities where violence was constant and chosen peace instead. They did not know that Steven had once stood against dangers that would freeze other men in place. The villagers kept silent, but whispers moved fast, and soon the words reached the small house at the edge of the farmland. Keanu was the first to hear. He was sitting on the porch, sharpening a tool, when a young boy from the village came running, his chest heaving. The boy's eyes were wide with fear. "They said they're coming here," the boy whispered. "They're coming for you." Keanu looked at him for a long moment. His eyes softened, but there was something deep in them, something the boy could not understand. "Thank you," Keanu said gently, handing him a cup of water. "Go home. Stay with your family tonight." Inside the house, Steven sat in silence, listening. He did not ask questions because he did not need to. He knew the sound of trouble long before it arrived. They were men who had chosen the quiet path, men who wanted nothing but the peace of soil and sun. Yet both knew the truth. Peace is not given freely. Sometimes, it must be protected. That night, as the wind carried the distant roar of engines down the country road, the two men stood together by the barn. Keanu's face was calm, almost sorrowful. Steven's expression was unreadable, but his eyes carried a heavy certainty. They did not speak of the past. They did not remind each other of who they once were. They did not have to. The gang thought they were walking toward two simple farmers. What they were truly walking into was something far different. And as the sound of engines grew louder, the night seemed to hold its breath. The night air grew heavy as the gang's trucks rumbled closer, their headlights sweeping across the quiet road like hungry eyes searching for prey. The village had already gone silent, doors locked, windows shuttered, lamps blown out. Only the distant hum of engines and the crunch of gravel under heavy tires broke the calm of the farmland. Keanu stood near the wooden fence, his hands resting lightly on the worn rails. He looked like a man waiting for the evening breeze, not like someone preparing for a storm. But inside him, there was a stillness, the kind that comes only after years of walking through chaos and learning to master it. Beside him, Stephen leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed. He had not spoken since the warning came, yet his silence carried more weight than words. The first truck pulled up, kicking dust into the air. The gang spilled out laughing, their boots striking the ground with false confidence. Their leader, the scar-faced man, stepped forward. His grin was wide, but it held no warmth. "Look at this," he said loudly, so his men could hear. "Two farmers guarding dirt. You think this land belongs to you? It belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it." His men cheered, some waving chains, others carrying pipes. One tossed a bottle against the fence, glass shattering into the night. Keanu's voice was quiet when he answered, "This land belongs to no one. We only care for it. You are not welcome here." The gang erupted in laughter. One man mocked his soft tone, repeating his words with a high, mocking voice. Another spat on the dirt, stepping closer with a sneer. Stephen pushed himself from the barn wall and took a slow step forward. His movements were steady, almost lazy, but his presence made the laughter falter for a heartbeat. The scar-faced leader smirked. "What are you going to do, old man? Hit us with a shovel?" For a moment, silence stretched across the farm. The crickets had gone quiet, as if even they were watching. Then the gang made their first mistake. A tall man with tattoos running down his arms rushed forward, swinging a chain like a whip. The sound of metal cutting the air was sharp, meant to scare. Keanu didn't move until the last instant. Then, with a speed no one expected, he stepped aside, caught the chain with one hand, and twisted. The man cried out, crashing to the dirt as the chain slipped from his grip. Gasps broke from the gang. One of them cursed. The scar-faced leader narrowed his eyes, no longer smiling. "He's fast," one muttered. "Fast don't matter against all of us," another said, though his voice wavered. Stephen finally spoke, his tone low, almost a growl. "Leave." The leader barked out a laugh, trying to cover the unease settling over his men. "Or what? Two of you against all of us." Keanu released the chain, letting it drop to the ground with a heavy thud. His gaze was steady, not filled with anger but with something deeper, something the gang could not read. "We asked for peace," he said softly. "Don't force us to choose another way." The words seemed simple, but they carried a weight that made the air tighten. For the first time, some of the gang shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. They had come here expecting fear, expecting begging and surrender. Instead, they found calmness that felt dangerous. The scar-faced leader clenched his fists. Pride would not let him back down, not in front of his men. He raised his hand, and the rest of the gang surged forward, their footsteps pounding the ground, their shouts filling the night. Keanu and Stephen did not move until the last moment, and when they did, the quiet farm became something else entirely. Keanu slipped between two attackers, his movements fluid, almost like water. A fist aimed for his face met only air before his elbow struck, dropping the man to the ground. Stephen moved slower but heavier, each strike of his hand and foot echoing like thunder, sending men stumbling backward with groans of pain. Panic spread quickly among the gang. Their weapons clattered uselessly against empty space or were torn from their hands. One man tried to swing a pipe at Keanu, only to find himself twisted to the ground in a blur he couldn't follow. Another rushed Stephen from behind but was stopped with a single backward strike that knocked the air from his chest. Within minutes, the dust settled. Groans and curses filled the night as the gang staggered, beaten, but not broken. The scar-faced leader stood back, his smirk gone, his eyes sharp with rage. He pointed at the two men, breathing hard. "You think this is over? You have no idea who you're dealing with. We'll be back, and next time you won't stop us." His men, shaken and humiliated, dragged themselves back to the trucks. Engines roared, tires spun, and soon the night grew quiet again, the sound of their retreat fading into the distance. Keanu stood still, breathing slow, his face unreadable. Stephen's arms were crossed once more, as if nothing had happened. But both knew this was not the end. The gang's pride had been wounded, and men like that did not forgive humiliation. They would return, stronger, more dangerous, bringing with them not just greed, but fury. And when they came back, the quiet fields would again become a battlefield. The next morning, the fields looked the same as always. Sunlight falling gently across the rows of green, the soil soft underfoot, the birds returning to sing as if nothing had happened. But the village felt different. A heaviness lingered in the air. Whispers spread from house to house about what had happened the night before. Some spoke in awe of how the two quiet farmers had stood against so many. Others spoke in fear, knowing men like that gang would not accept defeat. Keanu walked the rows slowly, his hands brushing the leaves of the plants he had tended with such care. His movements were steady, but inside his mind he could feel the weight pressing down. He did not regret standing against the gang. Violence had never been his desire, but neither could he stand idle while others were threatened. Yet he also knew what would follow. Men driven by pride always returned, and when they did, they returned crueler. Near the barn, Stephen was repairing a broken fence post. His broad hands worked the wood with quiet strength. He said nothing, but when Keanu passed, he looked up, his eyes heavy with meaning. No words were needed. Both men carried the same knowledge. Later that day, an old villager came to the farm. His back was bent, his beard white, his eyes tired but sharp. He carried a small basket of bread as an offering, his way of showing respect. "You did what no one else could," the old man said softly. "But you must be careful. These men, they are not like wolves who fight and leave. They are like fire. If they feel insulted, they burn everything until only ash is left." Keanu accepted the bread with a gentle nod. "Thank you. We will be ready." The old man's eyes filled with sorrow. "Ready, yes. But remember, when fire spreads, even the innocent are caught in it." His words stayed with Keanu long after he left. That night, while the sky stretched wide and stars filled the dark, Keanu sat on the porch, sharpening the same old blade he had always used for work in the fields. His movements were slow, thoughtful. Stephen sat beside him, his posture heavy, his silence unbroken. After a long time, Keanu finally spoke. "We came here to live quietly," he said. "We wanted nothing but peace." Stephen's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Peace is not given. It's tested." Their voices were low, but the night seemed to lean closer, as if it wanted to hear. The next day, the warning arrived. A young woman from the village, breathless and afraid, ran to the farm. "They're gathering," she said. "Not just the men from last night. More are coming. Others they've called. They say they will take everything. The village, too." Her words struck like cold iron. This was no longer about two farmers. This was about everyone. Keanu's jaw tightened, though his eyes remained calm. "Go back to your family," he told her gently. "Stay close to them. No matter what happens, protect each other." When she left, silence fell again. The sound of the wind moving through the fields seemed sharper now, carrying a warning of its own. That evening, the villagers gathered at the edge of the farmland. Their faces were filled with worry, some with shame. One man stepped forward, his voice shaking. We cannot fight them. We are not like you. They will crush us. But if you stand with us, maybe we have a chance." Keanu looked at them with kindness, but also with sorrow. "We do not want anyone hurt. If standing with you means protecting your homes, then we will not walk away. Stephen gave a slow nod, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. But you must be ready. This will not be easy. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. They were farmers, shopkeepers, mothers and fathers. They had no training, no weapons beyond tools. Yet in their eyes there was something more, a small spark of courage, born not from strength, but from love of home. As the sun sank, painting the sky in streaks of red, Keanu and Stephen prepared. They reinforced the fences, stacked heavy tools near the barns, and mapped out the paths that led through the fields. Their movements were precise, as though they had done this countless times before. Their bodies remembered what their hearts had tried to forget. That night, Keanu stood by the window, watching the distant hills where faint fires flickered in the dark. The gang was out there, gathering, preparing, waiting for the right moment to strike. And for the first time, the quiet farmland no longer felt like home. It felt like the beginning of a storm. The men who had come for land and crops were now coming for something greater. They were coming for pride, for vengeance. And when they arrived, they would not care who was caught in their fury. But what they did not know, what they could not understand, was that the two men they thought were simple farmers had already walked through storms far worse, and this time they were not fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who had trusted them. The village was not built for war. Its streets were narrow, its homes made of wood and stone, and its people carried more hope than weapons. Yet as the days turned heavy with silence, everyone felt the same truth pressing down. The gang would return, and when they did, it would not be like before. Keanu and Stephen walked through the village that morning. Children clung to their mothers, men and women avoided eye contact, and whispers followed them wherever they went. Not out of fear of them, but of what stood ahead. An old woman stopped them by the well. Her hands trembled as she held out a loaf of bread, cracked and dry. "We have nothing else to give," she said, "but take this. If you leave, we will understand." Keanu's gaze softened, and he shook his head gently. "We are not leaving. This is our home, too." Stephen placed a steady hand on the well's stone edge. His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of mountains. "We've faced storms before. This one will not break us." That evening, smoke rose on the horizon. Engines rumbled in the distance, louder than before, joined by the sound of shouting and music from radios. The gang was coming back, and this time they had doubled their numbers. Trucks rolled into the valley like a line of hungry beasts, their lights tearing through the night. The villagers gathered at the square, fear tightening their breaths. Some clutched farming tools, others only their bare hands. Keanu stood before them, his presence calm, his voice gentle but firm. "Listen to me," he said. "Fear is natural, but it cannot guide you. You are not soldiers. You do not need to fight like them. You only need to protect what matters. Your families, your homes, your lives. Stay close, watch for each other, and trust us." His words did not erase their fear, but they planted something else in its place. Resolve. As the trucks drew near, Stephen moved through the crowd, placing a hand on shoulders, giving quiet nods. His silence was its own comfort, a reminder that strength did not always need words. And then the roar of engines filled the streets. The scar-faced leader stepped out first, his grin wider than ever, though his eyes burned with rage. Behind him, more men poured from the trucks, some carrying bats, others chains, a few holding makeshift weapons. Their boots shook the ground as they marched forward, their confidence born from numbers. "I told you we'd be back," the leader shouted, his voice echoing through the square. "You thought two farmers could stop us? Tonight we take everything, and anyone who stands in the way burns." He lifted his hand, and his men spread out, surrounding the square. The villagers huddled close, their fear rising like a tide. Keanu stepped forward, his movements unhurried, his voice calm. "This is not your land. These are not your people. Turn back now, before it is too late." The leader laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "You don't give orders here, farmer. You got lucky once, but luck runs out." He snapped his fingers, and two men rushed forward. They swung pipes at Keanu, but in a blur he moved, ducking low, striking quick. Both attackers fell to the dirt, groaning, their weapons clattering away. The crowd gasped. Stephen stepped forward then, his boots heavy against the ground. One of the gang members swung a bat at him, but Stephen caught it mid-swing with one hand. With a twist, he yanked it free and tossed it aside. Then, with a single strike of his palm, he sent the man stumbling back, collapsing into his own men. The gang hesitated. The memory of the last encounter still lived in their bones, but pride pushed them forward. The square erupted into chaos. Villagers screamed, clutching their children, while Keanu and Stephen moved like shadows among fire. Keanu was fast, his strikes precise, his movements flowing like water, each motion controlled, never wasted. Stephen was heavier, slower, but his blows were like hammers, each one dropping a man where he stood. And yet, no matter how many fell, more kept coming. The scar-faced leader watched, fury twisting his face. He pulled a knife from his belt and stepped forward. "You think you can humiliate me again?" he growled. "This ends now." He rushed at Keanu, blade flashing under the torchlight. Keanu caught his wrist, twisting, the knife clattering to the dirt. But before he could finish, another man struck from behind, knocking Keanu to the ground. The villagers cried out, terror gripping them. Stephen turned, his eyes blazing, and charged forward. His strikes were heavy, his movements brutal, scattering the attackers away from Keanu. He pulled him back to his feet with a single hand, their eyes locking for a moment. "They won't stop," Stephen said. Keanu nodded, his breath steady. "Then neither will we." The fight raged on, dust rising, shouts filling the night. And though the two men stood strong, they both felt the same truth. They could not do this forever. The gang's numbers were too many, their anger too fierce. The village was caught in the storm. And as the night stretched, it became clear, this battle was only the beginning. Something darker was still coming. The dawn after the battle was heavy with silence. Smoke lingered in the air from torches thrown carelessly into the fields. Broken fences leaned, windows shattered, and the square bore the marks of a storm that had not yet passed. The gang had retreated again, but not in defeat. It was clear to everyone they would return, and next time they would come not just to fight, but to destroy. Keanu stood in the middle of the square, his shirt torn, his knuckles raw. The villagers gathered around him, their faces pale and weary. Some clutched injuries, others simply held each other, trying to draw strength from the closeness. A young man, no older than 20, stepped forward. His voice trembled. "We can't live like this. They will come back, and when they do, they'll burn our homes, maybe worse. What chance do we have?" Keanu's eyes softened, but he did not lie. "It will be hard. They are many, but strength is not always in numbers. It is in will. It is in standing for what matters." The young man shook his head. "You and Stephen can fight. But what about us? We're not warriors." Before Keanu could answer, Stephen's deep voice cut through the crowd. "Then you learn." The villagers turned, surprised. Stephen stood with arms crossed, his face unreadable, but his words carried finality. "You do not need to fight like us, but you can fight in your way. A tool in the right hands can be a weapon. A wall built with care can stop more than fists. If you want to survive, you must stand, not hide." The crowd murmured, fear and doubt mixing with something else. Hope. That day, the farmland changed. Keanu and Stephen worked alongside the villagers, showing them how to defend without becoming something they were not. Men learned how to move quietly, how to use shovels, hoes, and wooden poles as extensions of their bodies. Women built barricades from carts and wood, creating choke points at the village entrance. Children carried stones, filling baskets with makeshift ammunition. Keanu's teaching was calm, patient. He showed them how to step, how to breathe, how to stay steady when fear tried to take control. "You are not fighting to destroy," he told them. "You are fighting to protect. Never forget the difference." Stephen's methods were heavier. He showed them how to stand firm, how to strike with weight, how to use strength even in simple movements. "You don't need speed," he said. "You need to end a threat in one blow. Not fancy, just final." The days passed quickly, each moment heavy with preparation. And then came the message. Late one evening, a truck rolled into the edge of the fields. It did not rush forward like the others. It stopped, engine running. A single man stepped out, carrying a white cloth tied to a stick. He placed it in the dirt and left a box behind. Then he returned to the truck and drove away. The villagers gathered around as Keanu knelt, opening the box. Inside lay a single burned piece of wood, a matchbook, and a note. The words were short, written in uneven letters. "Next time, we bring fire. Your homes will be ash." The villagers gasped, fear returning like a wave. Keanu closed the box gently, his face calm though his chest tightened. Stephen looked at him, his jaw set. "They will not stop," Stephen said. "No," Keanu replied quietly. "But neither will we." That night, the village did not sleep. Torches burned at every corner, eyes watched the dark roads, and hearts beat fast with both dread and determination. Keanu walked alone through the fields, his thoughts heavy. He remembered the old man's warning, "Fire spares no one." He looked at the crops, the soil he had cared for with his own hands, and felt the weight of what was at stake. Not just homes, not just lives, but the very peace he and Stephen had tried so hard to build. Under the stars, he whispered a promise to himself. "If they come with fire, then we will become the storm that puts it out." The next morning, a scout returned with news. The gang was gathering in full force. Trucks, men, weapons, barrels of fuel. They were preparing not for a fight, but for destruction. And so the final choice stood before them all, to run and abandon everything, or to stay and fight for the life they had built. The villagers looked to Keanu and Stephen, fear in their eyes, but also trust. Keanu's voice was steady as he spoke. "We stay, together." Stephen gave a single nod, his silence enough. And so the stage was set. The gang would return soon, this time with fire, this time with fury. But what they would find waiting for them was not a broken village. They would find two men who had once walked through darker storms than this, and a village ready to stand beside them. The night was thick with tension. The torches along the village burned brighter than usual, their flames swaying in the restless wind. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound from the distant hills a reminder of what was coming. Mothers held their children close, fathers stood guard with tools gripped tightly, and the young who had once only known fields and laughter now carried the weight of survival in their eyes. Keanu walked slowly through the square, speaking gently to each family he passed. His words were simple, but they carried strength. "You are not alone. Stand with each other. Trust in each other." His presence calmed shaking hands and eased pounding hearts, even for a moment. Stephen stood at the far edge of the square, facing the road. He did not move, did not speak. He watched the horizon with eyes that had seen storms before, and in his stillness, others found a strange kind of courage. Then the sound came. Engines roared like thunder rolling down the valley. Headlights cut through the dark, dozens of them, sweeping across the fields. The ground shook as trucks filled with men and weapons rolled closer, their shouts loud, their laughter cruel. This was no raid. This was an invasion. The scar-faced leader stepped out first, climbing onto the hood of his truck. His voice tore through the night like a blade. "Tonight it ends. We warned you. You should have left. Now your homes, your fields, your lives, all of it will burn." His men cheered, raising bats, chains, and torches. They poured out, a flood of violence rushing toward the square. For a heartbeat, fear froze the village. But then Keanu stepped forward, his voice carrying steady and clear. "This is our home. You will not take it." And then the storm broke. The gang charged, fire in their hands. Villagers braced behind barricades, hurling stones, swinging tools. Keanu moved like water through the chaos, fast, fluid, precise. He disarmed one man, tripped another, his strikes sharp but controlled. He did not fight with rage. He fought with purpose, each motion to protect, not to destroy. Stephen was the opposite, a wall of strength. When a torch was raised toward a home, he struck the attacker down with a force that shook the dirt. When 3 men rushed him at once, he met them head-on, each blow from his hands and feet sending them sprawling. His silence was louder than their shouts. Yet the gang pressed harder. Torches flew through the air, setting fences ablaze. Screams rose as fire caught on dry wood. Keanu turned, leaping into the flames to kick a torch away before it touched a roof. Villagers rushed with buckets of water, dousing sparks, their fear turning into fierce determination. The scar-faced leader pushed through the fight, his knife gleaming under the firelight. He lunged at Keanu, his movements wild with fury. Keanu blocked, twisted, the knife flashing dangerously close. The leader spat curses, his strikes fueled by pride and rage. Keanu's face stayed calm, sorrow in his eyes as he whispered, "You could have walked away." With one final move, Keanu disarmed him, the knife clattering to the ground. The leader stumbled back, but before Keanu could finish, another attacker lunged from behind. Stephen stepped in, his strike heavy and final, dropping the man instantly. The leader froze, his bravado gone, fear creeping into his eyes as he realized what he faced. The villagers, inspired by the 2 men, surged forward. Together they pushed the gang back, blow by blow, step by step. Torches fell, fires were smothered, and the roar of the gang turned into cries of defeat. The scar-faced leader, seeing his men fall and his pride crushed, turned to flee. But Keanu caught his arm, holding him in place. His voice was quiet, but it cut deeper than any blade. "Leave this place. Never return. If you come again, you will not walk away." The leader's eyes darted, searching for escape, but the villagers now stood around him, their courage unshaken. He yanked free and ran, his men scrambling after him, trucks roaring into the night. And then silence. Only the crackle of dying flames and the heavy breaths of the villagers remained. Slowly, one by one, they realized what had happened. The gang was gone. They had stood their ground. They had survived. Children ran to their parents, tears of relief streaming. Men and women dropped their tools, hugging one another tightly. Some cried openly, not from sorrow, but from the release of fear that had gripped them for too long. Keanu stood in the center of it all, his shirt scorched, his hands bruised, his face calm. He looked at the people and gave a small, gentle smile. "You were stronger than you believed." Stephen crossed his arms, his expression unreadable, but in his sigh, once there was pride. The villagers cheered, not for victory alone, but for the bond that had been forged. They were no longer helpless, no longer just a quiet village waiting for ruin. They had found their strength, together. In the days that followed, the fields grew green again. The fences were rebuilt, homes repaired. Life returned, but it carried a new weight, a new pride. The villagers looked at the two farmers differently now, not just as quiet men who worked the soil, but as protectors, as guardians. Keanu and Stephen, however, returned to their work in the fields as if nothing had changed. They asked for no recognition, no reward. When thanked, they simply nodded and moved on, their hearts still tied to the soil and the peace they had chosen long ago. Yet everyone knew, if danger ever came again, the two quiet farmers would rise. Because they were not just men of the earth, they were men of storms, who had chosen kindness but never forgotten strength. And so the village lived on, safe, humbled, and forever changed.